Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name's Jeff Delco. I direct the Environmental Change and Security Project this morning. We're so pleased to be hosting this book launch this morning. The Woodrow Wilson Center, for those of you who might be new to the center, is actually the formal memorial to Woodrow Wilson, founded in 1968 by an act of Congress to be a nonpartisan, non-advocacy institute that tries to bridge the worlds of scholarship and research and policy and practitioner. And so the book that we are launching today, The World's Water, certainly illustrates and helps us fulfill that mission. The Environmental Change and Security Project is 10 years old and really tries to tackle issues of environment, health, population, demography, and put those in the context of broader foreign and even security policy issues. And again, the work that Peter Gleick has done both in this book, but also a lot of his larger work, he's been a primary contributor to that discussion and debate, and so we're thrilled to have him here today. The World's Water, the Biennial Report on Freshwater Resources, is a book that is familiar to all of you. This is the new edition that we've been eagerly looking forward to. Peter is always provocative, he is always insightful, and in many ways he and this book help set the agenda on water discussions and debates, and really water policy, and where we need to focus and how we need to try to tackle these problems. I think this book and this edition has been, looks terrific for integrating the international as well as the domestic, something that is often segmented and treated apart, and so again making a contribution there. We're very pleased to be collaborating with Peter and the Pacific Institute, something that we at the Wilson Center have done for a number of years on a number of projects, and so we're thrilled to be doing it once again. He's been invaluable as an advisor to our Navigating Peace Water Initiative, an initiative that's trying to understand the directions of future conflict and cooperation over water, an initiative supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and we're very thankful to Peter for his insights and advice on that effort. We're also thrilled to be collaborating today with Island Press, something we've done on a number of occasions and a number of book launches, including in previous editions of The World's Water, and so it's a great thrill for us to do that. It happens that their list is filled with titles that are of great interest to us, so it makes it easy for us to have these common interests. And so to do that, I'd like to introduce Todd Baldwin, a senior editor there at Island Press, who will say a few words and also introduce Peter and get us started. So thank you very much for coming.
Hi, my name is Todd Baldwin. I'm editor-in-chief at Island Press, but my real claim to fame is that I'm Peter Gleick's editor on the World's Water series. And that's why I'm here today. In many ways, Peter is the ideal Island Press author. Island Press is a nonprofit publisher, and our aim is to disseminate scientifically grounded information with the purpose of promoting a healthier environment. And what we do is sort of a balancing act between science and advocacy. And Peter is the perfect author, because I don't think there's anybody that carries off that act more gracefully than Peter does. He's a meticulous scientist, and he's also as forceful an advocate for sound policy as anyone I've ever seen. Peter is the co-founder and president of the Pacific Institute for Studies in Development, Environment, and Security in Oakland. He works on the critical connections between water and human health, the hydrologic impacts of climate change, sustainable water use, privatization and globalization, and international conflicts over water resources. As many of you may know, in October of last year, Peter received the MacArthur Fellows Award, also known as the Genius Award, and he was also dubbed a Visionary of the Environment by the British Broadcasting Corporation. The same year, he was also appointed to the Water Science and Technology Board of the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., and he is also an academician of the International Water Academy in Oslo, Norway. But there's one other thing that you should know about Peter, and that is that Peter is a little bit of a prankster. Not long ago, Peter and I were talking at a conference, and a reader of The World's Water came up to me and to Peter and said, I caught your joke in the book. And I looked at Peter and I said, joke? What joke, Peter? He slipped one by me. And I will invite... I'm not going to tell you what the joke was. I'll invite you all to find it in the current edition of The World's Water. Actually, there's more than one, I think, Peter, am I right? And I would also make a note to Peter that if in the future you want to slip a joke by me, or if you want to put something into the book, you can consult with me first. I'm available to talk in private. But if you do find the joke, great. If you don't, you'll at least have read a very important book. Peter, I'm privileged to introduce one of my favorite authors, Peter Gleick.
Thank you very much. I have to start by saying, first, I'm delighted to be here. The World's Water comes out every 2 years. It's a labor of love, but it is a labor. And it really wouldn't have happened without the full support of Todd Baldwin and Island Press. They've just been great to work with. Not many authors love their publishers, but Island Press is just great. I also want to thank Jeff DeBelco, who is a pleasure to work with always. I think the work that he is doing at the center is really important work, and it's been great to work with him on the issue of water and conflict. Thank you for hosting this. The first volume of The World's Water came out in 1998. This is the fourth volume. Every one of them is a little bit different. And the last volume, the third volume, was released also here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and Jeff offered me an opportunity to come and talk about global water issues and national water issues at the time, and he's offered me the same opportunity for the release of the fourth volume, and I really do appreciate it. I'm also going to take the opportunity not really to talk about what's in the book, although I'll talk about some of the things that are in the book, but to talk about this subject, that is the need for U.S. leadership on the issue of water, both nationally and internationally. And that's not the subject of The World's Water. There are little hints about some of these things in the book, but that's not really what the volume is about. So I'm going to sort of do two things at once. This was the first one, 1998-99, World's Water 2000, 2001. I think these are all out there. 2002, 2003, and then the new one. And I would be incredibly remiss if I didn't say that in addition to it being a labor, I did the first two volumes myself, but the third volume and the fourth volume, I gave up because water is a huge issue. And for this volume, I have many co-authors, many people who worked on pieces of the book, on chapters of the book. So this is not a single author thing. This is a very multi-authored thing. Nick Kane, who's the communications director at the Pacific Institute, is here. Nick wrote a great analysis of the Third World Water Forum in Kyoto last year, a major international water meeting with 10 or 15,000 water experts and tens of thousands of members of the public coming. Nick described that. Catherine Hunt, is Catherine here? Catherine has worked with us extensively on water privatization, and then she left us to come to Washington and is now trying to fix things at the World Bank. I'm saying that, she's not saying that. And as you can see, there are many other authors, all of whom have been associated with the Pacific Institute in one way or another, and all of whom I thank enormously. Okay, the problem. The problem you all know. It's world water problems, which are local sometimes and global other times, are growing in scope and extent and importance and attention. I'm going to argue that the U.S. has no coherent international water policy. That's not to say we don't do things at the international level, and it's not to say we don't do good things at the international level, but the things we do are not well structured and well organized from my point of view. I would also argue we have no coherent national water policy, and that there are certain things that it would be useful to have a coherent national water policy. Not everything, but some things. And these three factors together lead to problems for the United States and abroad. They lead to problems globally and in other places. The World's Water is chapters on water issues, and it's numbers. There's always been an extensive data section in the back. Just for fun, I pulled out a few things of interest just to whet your appetite. ODA spending, overseas development assistance spending globally for water supply and sanitation is about $3 billion a year. Globally, we spend about $50 billion a year on bottled water. Agricultural subsidies are about $300 billion a year. These are all in different places in the world's water. The ratio of the price of bottled water to the price of tap water in the United States is about 2,000 to 1. The toll from water-related diseases is about 2.1 million deaths a year from diarrheal diseases, which is the vast majority of water-related diseases. And there are about 75 million disability-adjusted life years lost every year from water-related diseases. The DALY is the standard adopted by the World Health Organization to measure years of life lost or years of disability that one lives associated, in this case, with water-borne diseases, water-related diseases. Some more numbers. 4 countries account for more than 60% of all reported groundwater use: the US, India, Pakistan, and China. But data on groundwater are terrible. Only 50 countries report groundwater use data globally, and one doesn't necessarily have to believe those data anyway. In Bangladesh, the estimate is that 21 million people are exposed to serious levels of arsenic in their drinking water. The area of global irrigated land is growing, but it's growing more slowly than population. In other words, per capita irrigated land worldwide is decreasing. That's certainly a food challenge. Total global production of cereal crops in 2002 was less than it was in 1996. Total global production, less than 1996 and less than 1997 and 98 and 99. It's dropped quite a bit. Just some indication, some flavor, some of the kinds of issues that face us around the world. Now, on the solution side, the world's water has always been sort of a combination of problems and solutions. I think I guess I woke up optimistic this morning, which I don't always do. There are lots of possible solutions to world water problems. I don't think these problems are technical. I think they're increasingly combinations of economic and political and social problems. I'm not necessarily saying that the solutions are easy. I think some of them may be easy. Some of them are going to be hard. But there are solutions out there. There are lots of them. I also believe modest investments of money and brains can produce pretty important social and political returns, globally and for the United States. I think these are nonpartisan issues. Senator McCain comes from Arizona. He understands water issues in Arizona. I understand, I heard yesterday that Senator Frist had a briefing on water internationally because of his concern about water and health. He's a doctor. Representative Linder from Georgia, Republican congressman, has had a bill pending for some time in committee to think about a national water commission, something I support, although I don't support the exact form of that. So there's a lot of interest from a lot of different places. People care about water. It doesn't matter what kind of people. These aren't red and blue kinds of issues. And I'm going to argue that it's past time for a new National Water Commission. We haven't had one in the United States for more than 30 years. And we've never had one that looks at U.S. role in international water issues. They've tended to focus on domestic issues alone. But we're an important player globally, and international water issues are an important problem. Okay. What are some of the most important issues? I've harped on this for a long time. Every volume of the world's water touches on this in one way or another. But the continued failure to meet basic human needs and ecological needs for water, I think, is still the #1 global water problem. The conflict between the economic value of water and the social value of water, which takes many forms. And the fact that we're living in a 21st century world with 20th century institutions, especially in the water area, in many different areas too, one might argue. But we had pretty well-developed water institutions, but they were designed for a world that I think is a little different than the world we are actually living in. Okay. This issue of basic human needs, I'm not going to talk about it much because I've done so in the past, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit because I think it's the worst problem. We failed to meet in the 20th century water supply and sanitation needs for the world's populations, for everyone. The estimate is that there's still more than 1 billion people without access to clean drinking water. I used to give the number that there were 2.4 billion people without access to sanitation, but this year WHO re-released those numbers, and now it's 2.6 billion people without access to adequate sanitation. Almost half the world's population. And that failure to meet basic human needs for water leads to water-related diseases, cholera and dysentery and schistosomiasis and guinea worm and the whole suite of bad things that happen to people when they drink bad water or are in contact with bad water. Because of this failure, because of the failure to meet basic human needs for water, the United Nations adopted 2 Millennium Development Goals to deal with water issues. There are a whole series of Millennium Development Goals adopted in the year 2000 to deal with poverty in general. 2 of them are water-related, and they are to reduce by half the proportion of people without access to water supply and sanitation by the year 2015. Not to reduce to 0, just to reduce by half, which is a tough enough goal. And I don't think we're going to meet that goal. The first chapter of the new volume of The World's Water addresses the Millennium Development Goals. It talks about this issue of basic human needs for water. And it looks at both scenarios for reaching the Millennium Development Goals and commitments globally to reach those goals. I think even with aggressive efforts, even if we meet the Millennium Development Goals, our estimate is that 35 to 75 million people are going to die between 2000 and 2020 from preventable water-related diseases. That's if we meet the Millennium Development Goals, and I actually think we aren't going to, for reasons I'll come to in a moment. And this at the bottom, if you can read it, this is the literal Millennium Development Goal, to have the proportion of people who are unable to reach or afford safe drinking water by 2015, and there's a comparable one for sanitation that basically says the same thing. Okay. Economic and social values. So again, there are a whole series of issues here. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them to give you a little flavor of what's going on and also to pull some ideas out of the book. The first is the debate between public and private in the water area. Sometimes it's a water privatization debate, takes different forms, but there's a very serious debate going on in the world water community now and in the United States about whether water is better, if water problems are better solved by public attention to these problems or private attention, or a of those methods. It's an unpleasant debate. People are worked up about it. And they're worked up about it because, in part, we failed to solve water problems, and people are looking for solutions. In the United States, 15% of the world, 15% of the U.S. population gets its water from private water systems. For the most part, well-run private water systems. 85% of us get our water from public water systems. For the most part, well-run public water systems that the rest of the world would love to have. Those private water companies aren't going to dry up and blow away if you're a firm believer in the public nature of water. Nevertheless, there are some important public aspects to water that private water companies don't adequately deal with unless there's government oversight. So that's a little flavor of the debate, and I'll touch on a couple more points related to that. But another one is this paradox of bottled water, and the second chapter, or the third chapter in the book, is devoted to this phenomenon of bottled water. There are a number of paradoxes with bottled water. It's available, ironically, in places where there's no safe tap water. It's considered cheap. We buy it without thinking about it in the rich countries, and yet it's really expensive economically and socially. We spend more on it than we would have to spend to meet 100% of basic human needs for water. This number of $50 billion a year for bottled water is far more than the estimates of the annual expenditures needed to meet basic human needs for everyone. Another aspect of this economic and social value is the way we spend overseas development assistance, we in the United States and we, the rest of the world. And that is, there's a conflict between the ideal of what we might like and what we actually do. Public versus private, this is this debate about privatization. We need to manage water as a social good. And let me just back up for a second. In the last volume of The World's Water, the 2002-2003 volume, there was a chapter on privatization that laid out some of these issues. The current volume extends that discussion. We had laid out a series of principles for addressing both the economic and social values of water. And in this volume, we look at a series of case studies, international case studies, where those principles have been met. Successful examples of public and private or public or private or public and private partnerships where one or more of the principles that we laid out were met. That's the good news. There are cases out there where successful things happen. The bad news in that chapter is that there is no case study where all of the principles together were met. And so that's a challenge for water management. But some of those principles are manage water as a social good. It has purely social values. But manage it as an economic good as well, and figure out a way to combine them both. Maintain strong government oversight and regulatory responsibility. Water service is ultimately a monopoly, and monopolies don't work unless there is oversight to protect the public interest. We learned this in California when we deregulated the energy markets, or we tried to deregulate the energy markets, and we're learning the same thing in water. And as I've just said, examples of successful management exist. Let's try and understand them, and let's try and replicate them. Okay, bottled water. This is a graph from the book. It shows trends in per capita use of bottled water use per capita in liters per person per year from 97 to 2002 for North America, Europe, South America, Asia, and Africa and Middle East. Showing two things. One, the very rapid increases in per capita use of bottled water, and two, the great disparities in use of bottled water. As one might expect, Europe and North America lead the way. This was actually a surprise to me. We drink more bottled water per person in North America than they do in Europe. I would not have guessed that. And it's growing more rapidly in North America than it's growing in Europe. And the numbers are, I mean, I was delighted to see tap water brought out. I was really worried that I should have known Jeff would do it right, but that bottled water would appear. But 80 liters per person per year in North America, that's a lot of bottled water. And I'm not drinking my share, so somebody's drinking more than my share. The other thing that's not shown here, but is shown in statistics in the book, is the rate of increase is really large, especially in places like China, where bottled water use is growing at 20% a year. It's huge rates of increase. It's a really big deal. Bottled water prices. These are also data from the book. We did some surveys in countries around the world. The units are US dollars per cubic meter. A cubic meter is 1,000 liters. And so if you look all the way at the left, California, where we pay about, this is retail. This is what you pay on average in the supermarket. It's about $1,000 a cubic meter. That's about $1 a liter. But South Africa, it's $850 in the supermarket for a cubic meter. 80 cents a liter. Spain, France, in India, Nepal, it's $200 a cubic meter. I pay 50 cents a cubic meter for my tap water. in California, very, very high quality water from the Sierra Nevada. So we're talking a factor of 2,000 difference here. I'm staying at a hotel. It's a nice hotel. It's not a wonderful hotel, but it's a nice hotel. And this is in my room, although it's not in my room at the moment. Next to a liter bottle of Evian, and it says, this bottle of Evian is provided as a service for our guests. If consumed, $5 will be billed to your room. That's $5,000 a cubic meter. That's the equivalent. That's what we're dealing with here. Okay. So there's lots of great information about bottled water. I could have just given a talk about bottled water. The chapter talks about water quality of bottled water, the difference in standards. You know, EPA regulates our tap water, but they don't regulate our bottled water. FDA regulates our bottled water, Food and Drug Administration, because it's considered a food. The standards are not bad, but they're different. There's some serious weaknesses in bottled water standards in the U.S. But anyway, the chapter talks about them, and it talks internationally about standards. It talks internationally about trends. Okay. ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. This is from data from the OECD. This is all overseas development assistance from OECD countries and from all the multilateral aid organizations devoted to water supply and sanitation only, not big dams, not energy. This is water supply and sanitation. The two bars are 3-year averages from 96 to 98 and 99 to 2001, showing that despite the really growing interest worldwide in water and water issues, ODA for water supply and sanitation is going down. That's one thing you should get from this chart. The other thing you should get from this chart is that the numbers are ridiculous. It's gone down from $3.5 billion a year to $3 billion a year. That's a really small number. I mean, if it had gone down from $300 billion a year to $200 billion a year, that would be bad too, maybe, but it would be different order of magnitude of a problem. So the trend is in the wrong direction, and the numbers are not big enough. And our contribution is really small. Of all ODA water, it's about 8%. It's actually gone up a little bit in the last couple of years, although all of that increase is Afghanistan and Iraq and the West Bank, and a large part of it actually hasn't been spent. It's been, what's the proper term, allocated, but it hasn't been spent. And if you look at U.S. ODA, total ODA, not just water supply and sanitation, but all the money we give, our contribution, measured as a percent of gross national income, GNI, is the smallest of all OECD countries at 0.13%. Now, I think that's bad. Some people could argue that's not so bad, but that's the situation. Okay. On the U.S. side, and this was sort of billed as a U.S. policy talk, so I'll come back to that. U.S. water problems are growing. We've had lead contamination here in D.C. and elsewhere that you haven't heard about. There are growing community objections to privatization of water in California, in Texas, in Michigan, in Louisiana. New Orleans had a big fight over efforts to privatize. Atlanta, which went private and then had to go public again because they weren't getting the services they expected to get. There is growing evidence of climate change, very clear evidence of climate change, with quite significant implications for water systems around the country. And those of you who heard me speak before, I can talk for a long time about climate change too. I don't, although there is an interesting chapter in the new volume on the experience of the state of California with integrating the science of climate change and the policy of climate change. There are two issues in the book that are California focused. It says the world's water on the book, but there are these two sections on California on issues that are of global importance. One is this issue of integrating science and policy in the climate area and the experience in California, which has had quite a bit of experience. The other is on water use efficiency. And the potential for improving water use efficiency in the urban sector of California, which also has enormous implications worldwide. But I digress. Groundwater contamination and overuse, I would add. Competition between the agricultural sector, the urban sector, and the environmental sector. This is true throughout the country. We're seeing fights over how our limited water resources are allocated. And they're not just in the western U.S. anymore. They're in Georgia and Alabama and Florida, and they're in Connecticut, and they're in Michigan, places that we tend to think of as not water scarce. We've managed to have water disputes with both of our neighbors, Mexico and Canada. Now, we have mechanisms to deal with those water disputes diplomatically, and we use them often, but we could use them to better effect. We have a very severe and prolonged drought going on. There's always a drought going on somewhere, but ironically, we've had one going on here for a long time, and we've ignored it. I downloaded this yesterday. This is the most recent weekly picture of the U.S. Drought Monitor, published by USDA and NOAA and the National Drought Mitigation Center, showing the severe drought in the western United States. November 9th, 2004, it says. This is the same graph for the same week a year ago. This is the same graph for the same week 2 years ago. And in fact, if you keep going, we're in the midst of a severe 5-year drought in the western U.S., in the Colorado River Basin especially. The reservoirs on the Colorado are lower than they've ever been, mostly. And if we start to get average rainfall again, it's going to take 15 years to fill them back up. We've drawn them down in 5 years, and it's going to take 15 years to fill them back up. And I would argue that the federal government, which has a responsibility for managing the Colorado River, which runs through 7 states, and we have a treaty with Mexico, has not addressed this issue adequately. We've ignored it. The not so funny joke is that our water policy on the Colorado is to pray for rain. Okay, so what should we do? Well, again, there are lots of pieces of this. I do believe we need a national and an international water policy. And before I get to the pieces of it, let me say clearly, I also believe that many, many water problems are purely local and have to be addressed locally. There are lots of things that the U.S. government has no role in and should have no role in. But not everything. There are certain things that it would behoove us to pay attention to at the national level and at the international level. Let me start with the international level. I think we need to spend more money, and I think we need to spend the money we spend better. A lot more money, I think. But even a little more money would make a big difference. Better spent how? I think we should invest in new forms of financing for water systems, microfinancing, small grants, invest in the education of foreign water experts. We used to be a world leader. The USGS used to have a wonderful program in training water scientists. And they'd go back to their countries, trained in the US, and they would ultimately be their country's leaders in water science and water policy. I went to graduate school with a guy who I took him to his first Grateful Dead concert, which is a hint about the joke that Todd Baldwin was talking about. He then became Minister of Water for Nepal. People like that we want to train. We want them to understand the science and policy of water. USGS can play a role. The Department of the Interior has had programs in this area. State Department can play a very effective role in this area. AID, World Bank can play a role in the first ones. New smart technology, monitoring technology, water purification technology at the large scale and also especially the small scale. This is an opportunity for U.S. business to make a lot of money, I think. Diplomatic intervention. I haven't talked much about conflict over water, but there is enormous international dispute and conflict over water, and it's growing. We have the diplomatic resources and skill and expertise to intervene, and sometimes we do, but not enough. It's time to acknowledge the human right to water. The U.S. has been really bad in this area, and I've harped on it for a long time, and I'm going to continue to. There is a legal human right to water. The UN's acknowledged it now. All the international legal water scholars agree, with a couple of exceptions, I'm sure. But I think there would be a value to acknowledging it. And then have the discussion about rights and responsibilities, which I think the U.S. is worried about. I think a lot more could be done in a global health initiative related to water. The CDC has been involved in this. NIH could be involved. Ironically, one of the biggest contributors financially is the Hilton Foundation, a private foundation in LA that is giving money and working with the Carter Center and with a number of NGOs to do water supply and sanitation projects in Africa. There are many non-governmental organizations involved, but they can't do it alone. They don't have the resources, and they shouldn't have to. Pieces of a national water policy. We need to phase out federal subsidies that encourage wasting and polluting water. We have a bunch of them associated with the price of water in the western U.S. for irrigation, and there are other examples. We need to get rid of them slowly. We may not want to get rid of them all, but we need to really get rid of some of them. And frankly, it would save us a lot of money. It would help the federal budget, and it would also reduce wasteful use of water, and would also reduce the pollution of water. And the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Reclamation have roles to play in this. We need a national research program for water. We have pieces of this, but it's not well coordinated. We do research on climate, as we should. It ought to be expanded in the areas of droughts and floods, because we know from the information that we already know about climate change that impacts on extreme events are going to be very important to us. First of all, they're going to be significant, and second of all, we already know extreme events hurt us. That's when people die and crops are lost and so on. Department of Commerce, which has a number of budgets in this area, can play a role, as can other organizations. We need new technologies for monitoring. There are all sorts of new generations of smart sensors being developed for monitoring water quality in real time. Right now, monitoring water quality is a really laborious thing, and we really care about water quality. The Department of Homeland Security is concerned about water quality and our water system from a security point of view, as it should be. And there's an opportunity to spend some of those security dollars in an effective way. And this is one example. National water efficiency standards. This is an example where we don't want local standards, we don't want state standards, we want national standards. You get 50 state standards and manufacturers don't know what to do. They hate that. And we have a national efficiency standard for toilets and for shower heads and for faucets that was passed in 1992 in the National Energy Policy Act, went into effect in 94. We need them for washing machines and dishwashers and car washes and commercial and industrial uses. The Energy Star program at the EPA has been an amazingly successful program, I think, at improving energy efficiency and at educating the public. We need the same kind of thing for water, and there's discussion about this. Better standards for protecting bottled water and for monitoring bottled water. I've touched on that already. Monitoring right now, there is monitoring of bottled water, but for the most part it's done by the bottlers themselves. Better river basin management. I touched on the Colorado, the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint rivers. There's a mouthful. There are a lot of there are a lot of river basins that are shared by 2 or more states in the U.S. They're having serious unresolved disputes that go on and on and on, and they're going to the courts, and they're sitting in the courts for years. Some federal attention to this might be useful. I also think we already have on the books a whole series of water quality laws, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act. I think they need better monitoring and enforcement than they're getting. All of these things are things that are worth thinking about in a more integrated way at the national level. In summary, global and national and local water problems are growing in scope and magnitude. I'm going to continue to try and do the world's water every 2 years. It's hard to do, but it's fun in some ways, and it's an opportunity each time to think about what's new and to call attention to some new issues. We've never touched on groundwater, a huge issue. The new volume has a chapter by Marcus Mensch on groundwater, international groundwater, that lays out not just some of the critical issues, but also some of the severe data problems we have. And so the opportunity to do that is a fun one, and it also offers an opportunity to think about some solutions. I think a comprehensive U.S. national and international water policy is overdue. I think that lack has cost us. It's cost us economically. I think it's cost us from a health point of view, perhaps us less than some other countries, but us as well. And I think there are security implications as well to the United States. I think these aren't fully understood. And it's past time for U.S. leadership. We have the opportunity to generate an enormous amount of goodwill. Goodwill is a tangible thing. From a corporate point of view, goodwill is an economic thing, hugely valuable. And the opportunity to increase U.S. goodwill in this area is enormous at relatively low cost to us. Thank you very much. Now, I'm happy to take questions. I don't know how you want to do this.
I think that would be terrific to do, Peter. I'll just ask people to identify themselves, let us know where you're coming from, and to please use a microphone. We're webcasting this live on the internet, and so we want to make sure our web viewers can hear your questions as well. So we will throw the floor open for questions. Who would like to kick us off? Gentleman down here, Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gleick. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on the whole issue of pricing of water, water services, water infrastructure. By most analyses, at least in terms of the United States, we're well below certainly the infrastructure needs and as well as the O&M needs, and how that relates to other issues of equity and concerns such as that. Thank you.
Yeah. The question of pricing of water is one of these economic and social balancing questions. I believe water should be priced. I think we should pay for the water services we get. Maybe the water is free, but we're paying for getting it to our door and in a clean enough way to use for whatever purposes we want to use it for. And I think that's pretty well accepted by the water community. The truth is the poor in many developing countries pay far more for water for bad water than they would pay if they were on a reliable municipal system. They pay far more for water than many of us pay for water. If they buy bottled water, they buy it from people in tanker trucks, or they're paying with their health. And there are plenty of surveys and studies that have shown that people are willing to pay for water. Now, what should people pay for water? I also believe that water should be subsidized for basic needs for people who can't afford to pay for water. That there's a minimum amount of water that frankly should be free if people can't afford to pay for it. And South Africa has taken that route. South Africa has provided a certain amount of water per person for everyone, regardless, independent of ability to pay, for free. And if you use more than that, you pay for it. And the higher level users subsidize the lower volume use. What we really want to do is we really want to cover operation and maintenance and presumably long-term capital investments if you want to expand the system. Now, in California, I actually pay pretty close to the marginal cost for water. I pay pretty much at home the full price of what it costs both to provide my service and to maintain the system. And that's perfectly appropriate. That's not true for everyone, and it's certainly not true for certain agricultural users. Now, agricultural pricing is a different thing. They're not using potable water. it's a different question, but the principle, I would argue, is similar. We could change, even modestly, the prices for agricultural water in California, and farmers, I think, would be better off. I think they would learn to use water more efficiently. Farmers are very smart. They would use water more efficiently, they would change the kinds of things they grow, and they would continue to make money. And in fact, the evidence is clear that that's true. And so one of the things that was, I didn't say it, but it was implied in this question about federal subsidies, is we subsidize a lot of Western water. And if we were to phase out those subsidies or even slightly reduce those subsidies over time, smarter things would happen. And a lot of water problems, I think, would go away.
Okay, the gentleman in the middle here. Pass the microphone down. Oh,
sorry. My name is Bernard Grissinger. I'm from Brazil, and I work for the Organization of the American States in Water Management. One of our largest challenge has been to move ahead in implementing water management schemes at river basin level. And I wonder if you can discuss a little bit over the topic of the municipality roles, the role of municipalities in this process. In the Americas, about 80% of the municipalities have less than 20,000 people. And they have institutional arrangements such as local laws, the local government branches, and they take decisions on land use planning, which is their role in most countries. And then the conflict comes that they decide on certain uses of land that are not compatible to the water management process, and then you start getting a local legal process that goes up to the federal government. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on this question that is being a bottleneck in the whole process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. That's a big question. I'm not going to say that much about it, but here are a couple of quick thoughts. This question of municipal management of water is a great example of the importance both of local management of water and national or some sort of federal role. Water is a local issue. Water supplies are often local. Communities have certain kinds of preferences for certain kinds of services. There are different kinds of political structures at the local level. And so you want to manage water at the I would argue, you want to manage water at the smallest local scale. At the same time, you don't want separate local water quality laws. You want one federal standard. One might argue you want one international standard. There are certain things that the federal government can provide in terms of structure and frameworks that can help especially small localities deal with water problems. We have a similar problem in the United States. A lot of water systems are really small scale. We have 50,000 or 60,000 water systems in the United States, and many of them serve communities of a few hundred. And yet they have to meet the same federal standards for arsenic, for example. Well, something that might be easy to do at a big centralized plant is much harder to do at the smaller level. And sometimes you then need federal financing. Sometimes you need engineering assistance. And so figuring out how to bridge that gap is you're not alone.
Okay, we have a couple questions in the back. The gentleman back there, and then over here, and then we'll come back down. Thanks.
Thanks again, Peter. My name's Jeff Albert. I'm a AAAS fellow at the U.S. Global Change Research Program. Peter, I hope you could say a few words about property rights. It's a really complex question. Frank Fisher at MIT has recently done some work on water markets and the usefulness of water markets in circumventing the zero-sum game nature of water conflict, but the establishment of a market requires the assignment of property rights, and allocating rights is particularly difficult in transboundary basins, as you know. So he's also argued that if you can cooperate that the assignment of rights doesn't really matter, and that a market will improve everyone's situation, even if no matter how rights are allocated. But anyway, I was hoping property rights you can touch on.
Franklin's not here, is he?
No, I didn't see him.
Okay, good. Then I can talk about him. This issue of property rights is a fundamental one. It's related to this public-private debate I talked about. It's related to international conflicts over water. It's related to the economic and social debate I talked about. And the work that Franklin's done, which is really interesting work, in ways that he maybe didn't expect, has highlighted the importance of the issue of property rights. And he did some work a few years ago, for example, on the Israeli-Palestinian water issue, in which he and his group at Harvard quantified the value of the water that was in dispute between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Some of the groundwater that Israel uses originates in the West Bank and then flows toward the Mediterranean and is pumped almost entirely within Israel. Now, there are legal questions about whose water that is and so on, and it's in dispute. But he looked at the quantities that were being used, and he put an economic value on it. He said, look, it's only $250 million. Now, I may have the number wrong, but that's order of magnitude. It's not a huge amount of money. And the way to deal with this problem is for Israel to pay the Palestinians the value of that water. Or that's unsimplifying, but that was what his argument was. The reaction to that falls into this area of the property rights question. For the Palestinians, the issue has always been property rights, not the volume of water, not whether or not new infrastructure should be built. The Israelis have always argued, let's make the pie bigger. We'll build desalination plants, we'll build new reservoirs on the Yarmouk, we'll increase the volume of water, and everybody will be better off, which is correct. The Palestinians have always said, look, we don't care how big the pie is. We want our share of the pie. We want our property rights, which is also correct. That's this conflict between property rights and economics. It's a conflict between public and private. It's a conflict between economic and social. If you don't assign property rights clearly in water, you're going to have disputes over water. We saw this in Cochabamba, Bolivia, when there were riots over the efforts to privatize water and people died. I'm a firm believer in public ownership of water. I'm sort of neutral on this public-private question, as you know. I don't think we can get rid of private water participation, private water sector, and I don't think we necessarily should. But I do really believe that there should not be private ownership of water rights. It should be public, in the public domain.
Okay. Back, Ken Conca.
Ken Conca, University of Maryland. Peter, could you say a little more about your call for a U.S. National Water Commission? What should the design principles be for such a commission, and what should its mandate be?
Yes, thanks, Ken. Every now and then we've had a National Water Commission. The last one ended in, I think, 1970. And there was one in 1950, and there have been these periodic commissions. They're asked for by Congress usually. They're appointed by some combination of Congress or the president. They have they're limited in term and duration. I think those characteristics should be repeated. The thing that I think is different about my call for a National Water Commission, and actually I testified on this in Congress about a year ago, and our testimony is on our website at pacins.org. We've never had a National Water Commission that looked at the U.S. role in international water issues. They've always looked at water in the West, management of the Mississippi, flood control, that kind of thing, all of which, as you know from my comments earlier, I think are really important. But I really believe that the time is past ripe for a review of what we do internationally, what we can do. And so I would ask that this commission look at the benefits to the United States of different kinds of participation in the international water arena along the lines of the examples I gave, and the risks to the United States of failing to do so. The economic and the health questions associated with expansion of water-related diseases, the business opportunities for the United States, the moral issues, which I think are paramount, and so on. And so my testimony lays out some of this in more detail, but I think the scope should be broadened over any previous commission. And it should be, I also think it should be nonpartisan, and I think it should be science-based. Okay. I mean, there's a policy component, but this is a place where good science is really important.
Okay. The gentleman here, then the lady in black has been waiting, then we'll get in the middle, come down here.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Kay. I'm with the International Bottled Water Association, and I too could speak for hours about bottled water. I took a brief look at your book and saw the entire chapter devoted to bottled water and some of your views about quality and the use of bottled water, the importance. However, it was my assumption or my thought that your book was about preserving, sustaining water resources, groundwater resources, etc. Nowhere in the book, except for one small chapter, did I see anything talking about data or actually information related to the bottled water's minimal use of groundwater resources or water resources for the production of this product, which you had pointed out is a regulated food product. I did see a small paragraph in the book in which you cite Robert Glennon, who himself has said that bottled water industry is an insignificant and minimal user of groundwater and water resources for the production of this product. So I just wonder how the bottled water industry has become essentially a poster child for your cause and for your information, but in your book you really do not talk about the water resource issues, but more of your personal views about, and as you've expressed here, the importance of bottled water, your views on the quality and safety of bottled water, which again I could spend hours talking about, of course, but would welcome that opportunity with folks at a later time. Also, just if I could touch on the second point, you mentioned you talk about bottled water in the privatization area in some of the teasers and the press releases and whatnot. However, bottled water, as you noted, is a regulated food product. So what would separate out, again, bottled water being a minimal user of water resources from the thousands of other food products that use water as an ingredient or in the processing of this product? I don't understand how the value of separating out and making this one small industry the poster child for your campaign to preserve and protect water resources.
Thank you for that question. I also could talk about bottled water for a long time, and I guess you're giving me the opportunity to talk about it a little longer. The book is about global water issues. And if you look over the 4 volumes, we look at conflict over water, climate change, water in big dams, food and water, water and human rights. I mean, there are a lot of different issues. There are no water issues that I feel I'm not allowed to talk about in the book. Having said that, I actually think bottled water is a huge issue for a lot of reasons. And if you feel I came down too hard in my talk on bottled water, I'm sorry, I'm not completely opposed to bottled water. Although you made some comments that aren't right. Bottled water globally is a tiny fraction of total water consumption, most of which goes to agriculture. It's a tiny fraction of groundwater use. But that's not the important measure. There are places where bottled water is not an insignificant fraction of local groundwater use. And as a result, there have been places, justified or not, and we could talk about that, where communities have been very upset about the presence of bottled water plants. And the United States has a number of examples. And they've led to a number of relatively high-profile cases of disputes about bottled water that, in my opinion, again, valid or not, reflect our failure to address the policy issues associated with bottled water, there are indications of our failure to really understand how groundwater is used and where real impacts on groundwater appear. It is a regulated food product. Its regulations, as I said in my talk and I said in the book, are different than tap water standards. They're better in some places, and they're better in some instances and worse in some instances. I think it's an issue for some more standardization, as I argue in the book. But it also has some broader implications. It has implications associated with meeting basic human needs for water in developing countries. It has implications for what people pay, poor people pay in developing countries. It's ironic, I think, that there are very extensive bottled water, commercial bottled water programs in places where people don't have access to tap water. And that's not the fault of the bottled water companies. That's the fault of governments, as I've said many times, to meet basic human needs for water. Figuring out those policy questions is part of what I'm asking for, and what I hope maybe I said more clearly in the book than in my talk.
Okay, ma'am. Question right here in the black.
Hi, Amy Pickering from the EPA. You mentioned in the beginning of your presentation that the solutions to the global water crisis aren't necessarily technical, but you also said as one of your solutions for improving international water policy that there should be investment in new smart technologies and that there's opportunity for businesses to capitalize in this area. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and maybe mention some of the specific technologies that you think could be capitalized on.
Sure. A theme that's run through all of the books is something that we call the soft path for water. It's described very clearly in the first chapter of the last volume. The theme continues in this volume. And the soft path for water doesn't mean no new technology. Doesn't mean no new big infrastructure. There are places around the world where big infrastructure is still needed. Although we argue quite strongly that when we build that infrastructure, it's going to have to be built to different standards than it's been built in the past, economic and social and environmental standards. And that's one of the reasons why there's opposition to big dams, for example, worldwide. It's because of past bad things that have happened when we've built those things. But I also believe that there's an opportunity for some new smart technology, from small-scale monitoring, for example, to point-of-use water purification systems, which I have sort of mixed feelings about, but which show some promise, to medium-scale, community-scale, or village-scale water purification systems. There have been enormous advances in membranes and filter technology that offer the opportunity to move away from the traditional sort of chemical water treatment systems that have been very successful but are hard to replicate in developing countries. There are a whole new set of sanitation systems that don't require big centralized wastewater treatment plants that we know are expensive to build and hard to keep running in many places. I've been to Gaza, where I've toured a great centralized wastewater treatment system that was built in the 80s that stopped working a few years after that, and now raw sewage is, there is no wastewater treatment there now. Well, that's, it's easy to spend that money and then leave, and that's one of the reasons why I argue we need to spend money smarter. And so there are lots of examples. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, the gentleman in the middle. Yeah, thanks. And then go to the back.
Thanks. Hi, Jeff Mosier with the Water Reuse Association. Can you comment on the role of water reuse, water recycling, water reclamation as a potential solution for sustainable water use? We think of it in terms of reducing potable water demand and also augmenting groundwater and surface water supplies. And I have a second question I'll throw that I think you'll be able to follow up with. And the question of the increased interest in desalination in the U.S. by California, Texas, and Florida. I'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts were on that.
Sure, thank you. This is great. As more of these volumes of the world's water come out, I can point you to different places. The last volume had a chapter on wastewater reuse, and I think the last one had one on desalination. And so I didn't talk about it this time, but I'm happy to at least answer your question. It's actually related also to the last question. The days are not yet over, but they're ending, I think, when we could afford to spend billions of dollars to collect water that we've used for something and treat it in the United States to pretty high standards and then throw it away. Dump it in the ocean primarily, if you're on the coasts. That's what we do. We've always considered wastewater a liability. And in the 21st century, wastewater is a resource. It's not a liability. It's an incredibly valuable thing. Now, anybody who lives in New Orleans understands that because or should understand it, because they live downstream of, and they're using wastewater, reused water. We all are. And that's the natural cycle. In the last few years, the technology for treating water and reusing water has improved. And the policy has improved as well. We're getting much better at understanding where and how to use wastewater, reclaimed water, recycled water. There are lots of terms for it. And the reality is there are lots of uses of water that don't require potable water. There is still, in the minds of the public, a real challenge that they can't get over about using wastewater for drinking. And I have an engineering degree. I understand these systems, and it doesn't bother me. I'm happy to drink treated wastewater if it's treated to a certain standard, because I understand what it's gone through. But I also understand the psychological challenge. The good news is we don't need to use we don't have to have direct potable reuse where we're directly using wastewater. There are plenty of uses around the country in every municipality for treated wastewater, for cooling, for industrial use, for certain kinds of irrigation, for flushing toilets that don't require potable water. And we're seeing that more and more in different ways in different municipalities. We are using wastewater, recycled water in different ways. Desalination is connected to that in part because the technologies are sometimes similar, filtration technologies, reverse osmosis. I'm not an enormous fan of desalination for large-scale municipal use, primarily because of the economics. It's too expensive, despite the hype of the desalination industry. I shouldn't say hype, but despite the optimism of the desalination industry, it's still a little too expensive compared to conservation and efficiency, which is far cheaper. You can get far more water by using it more efficiently. Or agricultural transfers from the agricultural sector in the western U.S. So there's a lot of interest in desal in California right now, but I think it's still a little too early. The price hasn't come down enough for it to be significant without subsidies, and I don't think we ought to be subsidizing it.
Okay, the lady in the front. Okay.
My name is Nadia Saad. I retired from World Bank where I was working on water. My question is, I don't know if you're aware, or you're certainly aware of the recent hearings in Congress about the report of NASA on global warming.
Yes.
In fact, the hearings were presided by John McCain.
Yes.
If I understood it well, the countries that are now, the whole region that is now already suffering from water scarcity, global warming impact on this region will be that it will really increase this problem. Now, do you think that local solutions or regional solution will be possible to meet this challenge, or, as I really think it would need a sort of global solutions and global management to that? Now, my question is that, are we ready for this problem, for this challenge, and what do you think is needed in terms of global institutions or global solutions to do that, and what about U.S. leadership?
The issue of climate change, as I mentioned, is a real one, and we've, again, various volumes of the World Water have addressed various pieces of this. In fact, in this one, there's a little description of something called the Water and Climate Bibliography. It's a database of 3,500 mostly peer-reviewed scientific articles on water and climate. It's on our website at pacins.org, searchable by keyword, by author, by subject, by region, on the science of climate and water. And so we've done a lot of work in this area. The answer to the question is we need both local responses and we need global responses, and in between, national responses. At the local level, local water managers have to deal with local water issues. They are going to have to deal with the impacts of climate change, no matter what. Kyoto, no Kyoto, hydrogen economy, no hydrogen economy, local water systems are already feeling, in some places, the impacts of climate change. And there's a section in the book about how California is trying to integrate some of these questions into its water management system. For example, California has spent billions of dollars on a very sophisticated system of reservoirs and aqueducts and pipelines and water treatment plants and so on to deal with California's hydrology and water demand. We have not yet done the studies necessary. Well, let me back up for a second. On the science side, it is absolutely clear, with a high degree of confidence, the scientific community says, that climate change is going to affect very dramatically the timing of runoff in California because of effects of temperature on snow. Well, most of our water comes from the snowpack of the Sierra Nevada. And in fact, we're already seeing changes in the timing of runoff. Okay, so we have these reservoirs that are designed and operated under a historical set of conditions. Those conditions are going to change. And we have not yet done the studies in California and locally for how operating this system differently might or might not help us deal with those changes that we understand with a pretty high degree of confidence are coming. So we're going to have to deal with that locally. When we build something on the coast in California, we better design it for a sea level rise higher than the sea level rise, higher than the sea level we have now. Outflows for water treatment systems, for example. Design them now, or you're going to have to redo them at much higher expense in 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years. So those are local examples. I also believe at the international level, we'd better work to slow the emissions of greenhouse gases. Because if we don't, all of these local problems are going to be sooner and faster and more severe. I think we're stuck with some of these impacts anyway. But I do believe there's a vital international we have to reduce the rate of emissions of greenhouse gases. Now the European Union is doing that, and the rest of the world is doing that, and the U.S. at the moment argues that it's doing it under a different way, but as this Arctic report that just came out describes, we're in big trouble faster than we thought. And Senator Stevens understands this in Alaska now. It's going to, I mean, that's the reality.
Okay. Gentleman all the way in the back has been waiting. In the center, sorry. Well, now he's writing some notes, so maybe he does it. Okay, over here. Why don't we do it down the side? Nellie, if we could do down here? Okay, if you do have one, that'd be great. Go ahead.
Sorry, my name is Jamal Qadri. I live here in the district, and I was looking at the section on bottled water. You seem to attribute most of the trends towards increased consumption to perceptions about taste. But my anecdotal guess is that it's about lack of confidence in public water supply. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, just the sort of perceptions and reality of the quality of the nation's drinking water.
Yeah,
public supply.
I hope I didn't say it's primarily due to taste. It's due to a lot of different things. It's due to taste in some places. It's due to convenience in some places. And bottled water is really convenient. And at $1 a liter, if that's what you're paying, we're a rich country, and it's a free market. It is also, however, due to perception. Right or wrong, perception about the quality of our water. And in general, the quality of U.S. tap water is superb. It's great. And every now and then we hear about, because the media is good at reporting it, and I would argue that private water purveyors are good at reporting it. There are bad things happen. The lead example in Washington is a great example of an outrageous problem with monitoring and reporting water quality. Now, in fact, and there are lots of examples where periodically water systems test their water and come up short, and they have to fix the problem. All of those things contribute to the perception. But I think in general, the perception is excessive. The perception that our water, that we need to drink bottled water is, I think that's wrong. And I also think that the quality of bottled water is not always better than the quality of tap water. I mean, there are plenty of examples of bad bottled water quality. Also, standards vary. The standards in the U.S. are different than the standards internationally, which this chapter addresses as well. I'm not opposed to bottled water. I think we should use it. You should feel free to buy it if you can afford it, and if the taste of your water is bad. I wouldn't buy it if you think incorrectly that the quality of your tap water is bad. I think we need to do a better job about educating people about the quality of their tap water. Did that not address your question?
My question is, I mean, I've got identical twins who are 16 months old, and if I want to supplement my giving water, my wife wants to buy bottled water because she doesn't think the district's tap water is safe. My question is, what's the reality around the country of the actual quality? Because there are standards, but whether or not the standards are adequately monitored and enforced is the question. I think that the trend in bottled water consumption is linked much more to the crisis in confidence of our tap water supply than it is on things like taste.
I'm not disagreeing that that's an important factor. We could argue which is, the relative weights of them. But I also believe that what I was trying to say is that the perception isn't always the reality, and that there are plenty of people who may perceive, as you're arguing, that their tap water is unsafe to drink, who are wrong, who have safe tap water, and that's the failure of municipalities to educate the public, and it's also a fact that it's easy to advertise and to scare people that they're drinking bad water. And I see advertisements on TV, this isn't for bottled water but for these filters, that basically imply that if you don't do this, you're drinking bad water and you're poisoning your baby twins. And I don't know the quality of your particular tap water. Washington's had some problems, and they're legitimate problems that need to be addressed. But its perception's not always reality.
Okay. Gentleman down here on the side in the blue.
Yes, coming.
Hi. Anyway, I think...
And I've had about a gallon of...
You can tell us who you are, sir.
Oh, sorry. My name's Norm Anderson, and I work with a private company helping to develop water projects around the world. One of the things that's fascinating, your book, the first chapter, talks about the Millennium Development Goals, and then this conversation sort of mirrors the way the international community treats them, which is that you talk about them and then you stop talking about them. And can you talk a little bit about that? The Millennium Development Goals are fairly straightforward, simple goals for addressing a critical issue, which is connections in potable water and sewage. But there doesn't seem to be anything beyond that. Every meeting starts with, we have to meet the Millennium Development Goals, and then every private conversation ends with, we'll never meet those.
Well, you said it very well. That is the way the discussions often go. I don't actually... I believe it's possible to meet the Millennium Development Goals. And many countries are on track to meet the Millennium Development Goals according to WHO. Some aren't. In part, this is a problem of governance, of the ability of governments to meet their, what I believe is social responsibility to provide clean water and sanitation. There are also lots of ways of doing it. You can meet the Millennium Development Goals by giving people flush toilets, or you can do it with less expensive ways. And ultimately, it's going to be a combination. It's got to be a combination of appropriate scale and appropriate policies and appropriate economics. And the model for South Africa and the model for Mozambique right next door are maybe very different. And so there is no single model. I actually think the focus ought to be on countries where the Millennium Development Goals are really not being met, and that there really ought to be international effort to get capabilities up and running in those countries where you get the largest bang for the buck. And in some cases it's technology, in some cases it's money, and in some cases it's education. So I guess I really did wake up on the optimistic side of that. I do believe we can meet the Millennium Development Goals. I don't think it's a lot of money. but we're running out of time. There's a time limit on the Millennium Development Goals of 2015. I think we're in much more trouble on the sanitation side. The numbers are huge. I don't see how we're going to meet the Millennium Development Goals. I don't say we can't, but I don't think we're going to. And so it's a dual challenge.
Okay, we've essentially run out of time. We have two questions right here. Why don't we take the two of them together? Give Peter a final word.
Hello, my name is Mary Jo Larson, and I'm an independent consultant in conflict resolution. My question is really about transboundary or international disputes, and I'm following up on your theme of optimism. So I was wondering, with the principle of water is a human right in mind, could you give us an example of a situation where you felt that policy and science came together as a model of how transboundary disputes can be addressed?
Okay, and if you could just hand it to the gentleman here, we'll get his, and then give Peter final.
Well, that's a big question. In terms of the human right to water, I mean, the best example that people use all the time is South Africa, where the new constitution of the government of South Africa says there's a human right to water, and that they will meet basic human needs for water and basic ecological needs for water as their top priority. That's their so-called reserve with a capital R. And then after they've done that, they'll figure out how to allocate what's left to all the other users. And the example I gave of more recently in South Africa of providing a certain amount of water for free is it's the next step in their policy implementation of trying to do that. The government of Uruguay just put the human right to water into their constitution. There was a public election. They voted it into their constitution. On conflict resolution, and for students of history, there's a great chronology of water-related conflicts in the book, but there's also one online, although the one in the book at the moment is more up-to-date than the one online at worldwater.org. It's a history of conflicts over water from 3000 BC up until the present. There is a long history of conflict and cooperation over water. And as I said, I think we could put our diplomatic skills to much better use than we have in this area. And the use has played a role in various aspects of this. And there are various models. Right now there's a Nile Basin initiative underway to improve the international management of the Nile River Basin, which is shared by 10 nations. There's a treaty between the Sudan and Egypt, but the other 8 countries aren't party to it, and that has to change. There have been in the past very successful negotiations in the Middle East. There is a treaty between Israel and Jordan. There's a peace treaty, but there's an Annex 6 of that peace treaty, that explicitly addresses water, sets up a joint basin management committee. It allocates water from Jordan to Israel in the north and Israel to Jordan in the south. It sets up monitoring rules. It sets up dispute resolution rules. There are a number of examples internationally of successes in this area. And capitalizing on those is I think, what we need to get better at.
Okay, gentlemen, the final question.
Alex Patico, the Institute of International Education. Each morning walking to work, I see on the sidewalks hundreds of gallons of water being used to do what a push broom could do. On the subject of conservation and lifestyle, in this country, and second part, in developing countries, what do you consider to be the real low-hanging fruit in terms of conservation, factoring in the difficulties of public education and lifestyle change?
I think there's an incredible opportunity for more efficient use of water in every sector. We did an analysis that's described in the book on California's urban sector. We really did an end-use study, which had never been done. That is, we don't want to use water, except for survival and for cooking and for sort of basic things. What we want to do is we want goods and services. We want things. We want to grow food. We want to get rid of human waste. We want to produce computers. We want goods and services. And those goods and services require sometimes water. But they often require far less water than we use to provide those goods and services. And when water is scarce, or where, as one of the first questions raised, the economics of water are right, turns out we can do things with a lot less water than we think. I've given this example before, so many of you may have heard it, but It used to take 200 tons of water to make a ton of steel in the U.S. in the 1930s. The best steel plants worldwide now use 3 to 4 tons of water to make a ton of steel. It used to take 6 gallons of water to make a gallon of milk. The processing, not including growing the cow. It now takes, the best dairies now use only about 3 gallons of water to make a gallon of milk. It's washing and purification and things like that. The study we did for California says we can do in the urban sector all of the things we currently do, maintain benefits and uses the same with existing technology, cost effectively, with 30% less water. That's a huge amount of water. We didn't address the agricultural sector, which also has similar abilities to improve efficiencies. That's just the urban sector of California. Well, it turns out 30% savings would eliminate the need for new water supply in California for decades. It would eliminate the need for desalination. The challenge, and I don't want to minimize it, we talk about it, is capturing it. Water utilities know how to build a dam that provides 100,000 people with water. They're much less happy about trying to deal with 100,000 people's water uses. It's not so easy. And so it's a combination of standards, national standards, I've argued, economics, policies that educate people about water use. Capturing those inefficiencies is a little more complicated than what we're used to doing. I think it's doable, but that's, I think, an area for enormous amount of work, implementation.
Terrific. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but won't you all join me in thanking Peter for this real contribution?
Yeah, anyway, I think you're but it's really complicated stuff. And the former is doing great work. Great. Thanks. Good to see you.